conditional immortality, conditionalism. This book uses terminal punishment. There's a bunch of different names for the idea, but um, they're all basically the same idea. Um, and it's that uh, whenever a person goes to hell, whatever, however that means, right? That there is the final judgment, and that they experience hell as conscious torment, but they experience it only for a certain length of time. How long that length of time is going to vary by person, but they you experience it for a certain amount of time, and then at some point, you cease to exist, right? And so a lot of times this is going to get compared to it's going to get compared to like being burnt up. So right, so like if you imagine that you're set on fire, right? You're gonna burn for a while. You're gonna feel it. It's gonna be awful, but then eventually you die, and and uh, they're basically gonna say like, well, hell is a similar process, except for it is the second death, um, and so you'll experience a bit of torment for a while, but then uh, your soul, the immaterial part of you. Um, and again, this is a broad. There's a broad range of much like there's a broad range of views on eternal conscious torment. There's a broad range of views on conditionalism. Um, uh, so I will say that you like your soul is destroyed. That's probably the most common way that it's understood. But some people that adhere to this view also um, adhere to a view called physicalism, which means that you don't have a soul, that there's like just that that there's just like this body, that's all that there is, and so in that way, right, you're resurrected, and there's the resurrection, and then there's the final judgment, and so it's the resurrected body that like gets killed, right?
This is quickly starting to sound like heresy, though, isn't it?
So okay, so this is actually kind of a good segue that I want to try and like get into, and it's one of the things that I don't want to do with this. There's I don't agree with conditional immortality, and we'll get to my reasons for that. But um, the thing that I don't want to do is I I don't want to straw man the view, and it's there's a lot like there's a reason why the traditional view is called the traditional view, right? Like the vast majority of people hold to it. Now, there have been historically a lot of different people that have held to something like the conditional immortality view. It's not completely new, but it's always been a minority. Um, I think because it's usually a topic that sort of only comes up in nerdy apologetic arenas, um, a certain demographic of people tend to lean that way. And if they're more open to goofy ideas, they start to have other goofy ideas too. They seem to be more accepting of them. And I don't want to attack the view just because they also have other goofy ideas. Like I, I think physicalism is a very goofy idea. And I think you have a very difficult time explaining certain things in scripture if that is what you're going to affirm. Um, and I don't want to just do a well they're wrong by proxy kind of a thing. Um, and also heresy, the definition of heresy gets a little bit murky, especially for people like us. Because
Very true, very true.
yeah, like
I
the
I threw
amount
that
of
out there to cut through, but I would say bad doctrine,
yeah,
is what
I
I would settle on that.
I think it yeah, and we'll get into why I think that is, but yeah, but so did I explain that enough? Like, I mean, that's the overall idea, right? And the reason why, and so right, so that's why you get the term annihilationism. The soul is eventually annihilated, right? You cease to exist. It's a lot of times people refer the term conditional immortality because they're trying to harp on this idea of, um, well, the soul is not innately immortal. Um, and that the idea that the soul is innately immortal is a Greek idea, although personally I think the evidence for that is I've never seen it. It's one of those things that a lot of times you just people assert, and it's like, okay, where's the evidence that it's a uniquely Greek idea that the soul is innately immortal? I don't see that. Like, I think you have I think this idea is pretty universal, actually, that the soul is immortal. I'm sure that there are some cultures where it's not, but you'd have to also show me that Hebrew is one of those, and I don't think you can do that. um,
They're probably making some specificity claim there
yeah,
because there's tons of cultures with very obvious evidences for afterlife and afterlife like practices and ceremonies.
yes.
And so it's probably the specificity on okay, then that is not eternal.
So, so the term of the reason for the name of the view is that okay, what's happening during the final judgment is that God is granting immortality to Christians, basically, the people that are saved, and then he's not granting it to this other group of people. That's sort of the reason why they come. And then same thing with like terminal punishment, right? He's trying to say the punishment has an end, right? That's why it's the terminal punishment view. So, and there's not a consensus on the name of it either because this isn't a this isn't like it's not a massive amount of people that people have been like, oh yeah, this is the name that we're gonna stick with and we're all gonna go with. It's never had a ecumenical council be like, yeah, this is what we're going with now. So,
Mhm.
and if it
Well,
did,
that being said,
it usually ends up a different denomination. I think there are certain Christian sects that adhere to conditionalism views.
that being said, the strength of this view might not be as strong then on its face and in terms of followers. But what are like the strong points of this view?
Yeah, so I mean, I sort of mentioned this in the previous ones, but um, I personally think that the strength in the view is um, that very strong intuition of answering that philosophical question that we talk about like a finite amount of sin deserves a finite amount of punishment, right? And this view handles that in I think in a real fair way, right? And it provides in answer to that question. Do I think it provides it the best way? No. Um, but I think it's a really good. I I I think that it is a really good first draft at attempting to say, okay, is there a way that we can augment our understanding of what's going on to um, basically bring these different views together? Um, and so I think that on that philosophical level, I think it does a really good job. Um, I also think that the so this isn't I, I'm I'm putting this in the strength category, but it's not as strong as I'd like it to be. That's what I'm saying in a second. I think that proponents of the view, um, I think a lot of them do try to take what I would consider a correct approach to demonstrating their view to be true. Um, there is an emphasis on trying to use scripture to validate their view, which I think is the correct thing to do. Um, and there also is a fundamental understanding that um, hell should be bad. Now, I think that there's a little bit of a disconnect between what people like. People be like, yes, people that affirm conditional immortality will say like, oh yes, we agree that hell is bad. Yes, but in practicality, it, it's kind of not that bad. It's we'll get into that whenever we get into weaknesses. But yeah, I think I think once you start getting there, I like the direction that proponents of it are going, but I don't think that the view actually holds up to scrutiny on that point about okay, does this even match the thematic elements of what we're even talking about here, right? Like, is this a thing that Jesus warns people more than anybody else about hell, right? So much so that like there are people that argue that Jesus invented the idea of hell. That hell's not really even in the Old Testament. That Jesus is kind of like inventing it, right? This is kind of a liberal, critical theorist view, which I'm fine with, by the way, because like if he is the God of the universe, he would know if that's going to happen, right? um, and and like you need to make sure that this is a thing to be warning against, right? Um, and so, yeah,
I can understand. We skipped a bit to, but I can understand for you personally why you would appreciate the kind of tract or like view direction that this view is taking because I think I'm sure to a good amount degree the differences that this view in particular brings up would have kind of highlighted that question that you're trying to answer
yeah,
in
yeah,
your view.
for sure. Like I think I would say I can say with 100% confidence that if I hadn't been introduced to this debate that conditionalists have been posing against the traditionalist view, I never would have come up with my view. Like it just wouldn't have been a thing that I thought about. And so I appreciate that. I appreciate that endeavor. I just think it comes up short. Yeah.
Right. And so now we can get into that. So what
Sure.
are some of the weaknesses of this view?
So, um, because we just talked about it, this won't be in like the order of how of severity of weaknesses, but because we just talked about like the thematic ones, I'll keep going with that line of thought. In some ways, uh, the conditional like the annihilationist view of the afterlife, at least for the damned, is like almost the exact same as an atheist, right? Like an atheist believes that you die and you cease to exist. There, there there's nothing, right? Um, and the annihilationist goes, no, 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 that's not true. It will suck for some limited amount of time, and then you'll cease to exist and you'll forget about it and whatever. And like, to me, that's a problem. And I actually think that this is so probably the at least for me the proponent of conditionalism that is the most well known is a guy named Chris Date, and actually the like one of the earliest debates that I saw him arguing with um with someone that had held to a traditionalist view one of the things that he argued was, well, we should adopt this because like an atheist is more likely to like not be offended by it. And thankfully he has dropped that argument and actually has kind of gone like the other direction. But I still think that that kind of underlying idea is there, that like, oh, we're going to use this view as like a softening to try and make it more palatable to the people that are going to hell. And it's like that that doesn't really like jive with what it's supposed to be. Um like I don't think we should I don't think we should I don't think our view of hell should make people comfortable with the idea of what hell is, right? It should make people uncomfortable. Um, uh, so the bigger reason, though, um, it for weakness is that um, what you'll almost always find whenever you get into these debates and you see how conditionalists argue for their position, it's almost always a semantic debate. Um, uh, the basically everybody's using the same data points. Everybody's using the same verses. But what a conditionalist will do is they'll read the words slightly differently a um, from how a traditionalist point of view perspective will work, and so for me, you end up spending all of your time arguing these semantics, and I think that a lot of times they'll argue it and they'll make it sort of, if you squint, kind of work for like the particular verse that they're talking about. But once you take that and try to map it to like every other biblical data point, I, I think the whole thing just falls apart. And it also, I don't think they do a good job of actually fully thinking through their kind of redefinition of words. um, and it 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 ends up making the language kind of goofy and clunky, and it makes it not really even make sense as to what the Bible is then talking about, right? And so I'll try to give an example from here, right? So um just as a quick thing, right? So like the he has section headings. So like this one says the meaning of eternal, right? And so it's a big couple page thing arguing about what eternal means. And then you'll have the meaning of destroy and death. And you have a big argument about what it means to have death and destroy and all of this stuff. Um, and the problem is that it almost never works. So um, let me right. So here I'll just read a small like excerpt about the eternal part, right? And so, shaped as we are by the Greek heritage of our civilization, we tend to think of eternal having having continual existence or the like. If something is eternal, therefore it lasts forever. However, the Bible, however, uses the term sometimes in that respect and sometimes in other respects. Obviously, when God is said to be eternal, the Bible means forever. When the same adjective is used of mountains, however, sometimes clearly something else is claimed, in which the mountains are subject to drastic change in the day of the Lord. So again, that throw out of, well, we got this from the Greeks. How? But also this kind of special pleading of like, well, sometimes the word is used kind of differently, and but it's like, okay, well, you have to prove that it's being used differently in this context, right? So let's start talking about uh, eternal judgment. Hebrews 6 1 to 2 speaks of eternal judgment. Therefore, let us go on towards perfection, leaving behind the basic teaching about Christ and not laying again the foundation, repentance from the dead works, faith towards God. instruction against baptism, laying on of hands, uh, resurrection of the dead, and eternal judgment. The author of, and so this is, so that was just Hebrews 6 1 through 2. The author of this epistle cannot possibly have in view a judgment that goes on forever, as if God could never descend from the heavenly bench. Instead, all Orthodox Christians believe in some sort of last judgment that conducts for a certain amount of time and then concludes with the final verdict. While the implications of the decisions taken during that judgment are indeed permanent, everlasting, eternal. And so here's the thing. So you notice that last part that he said. What they'll say is, oh, it is an eternal punishment because they die and they don't come back. But then whenever you get into the argument about death and what death means, they'll say, "Oh, well, death means you're gone." Whoa, 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 whoa. You just had an example of people coming back from death to, to do this final judgment thing. So how can ceasing to exist be a part of the definition of death in on one part, and then on the other part you go, oh no, you come back and then the second time you actually cease to exist. Okay, well then that means that cease to exist can't be a part of the definition of death for the first time, right? And then it also becomes a thing where if you're saying that, oh, the fact that it's not reversed, that's the thing that makes the punishment eternal. All death sentences are eternal judgment, right? Like, if I go and I shoot a guy, I have eternally shot him because the effect of it is never reversed. It makes it so that if you try to apply their logic for how they're using these words, it actually just makes it so that the descriptor eternal is not needed. It doesn't do anything, right? Um,
Yeah, that was the exact thing that I was seeing already in that. And again, this because this gets on the part where I'm like, I would view it as it's funny to say heresy, but bad doctrine because they're like, okay, we're doing this thing where we're kind of undermining the word eternal, but let's also make sure that we're not having that affect God. Because if we do, and then are like consistent in what in the way we're applying our standards of like culturally, this would be understood differently. So therefore, technically, that opens the door to like you could say that about God because it's the same culture talking about God using the same word. So it should like apply. But then you're like, oh, but then we're limiting God and doing stuff of reducing God and affecting the divinity of God to a degree. And so they're like, okay, we're not going to overstep that. But without, like you said, requisite context, this other time when it comes up, it can't possibly mean that. And, and I don't see I don't see the grounding for that move.
yeah, you also end up with other like weird things, right? Because there'll be a lot of stuff about like verses that talk about eternal judgment of some site. And it'll say like, like the fire never goes out, or that there's a worm that like is always like is like undying worm that's like always like gnawing like at the bodies or whatever. And they'll go, oh well, yeah, sure, the fire never goes out and the worm is eternal, but the person is dead because it's a dead body, right? And so they don't have any kind of eternal existence. Well, then you're left with a weird view. Like if you're gonna take it like and not try to understand like that like okay, there's some kind of there's some kind like those
Why do we need to
those
know about the
those
decay process in hell? Like
yeah,
the
and also like why does hell just have these immortal worms going around? Like,
Why does the worm need to be immortal if there's a finite number of bodies that need to be eaten?
why does the fire need to be eternal? Right? Like it just leaves you with this weird. It leaves you with like, and it becomes a thing of like, why use this terminology of eternal fire if it doesn't need to be, right? Like if that was what was in the minds of the people that are writing it, and they don't need, just call it a great fire. Just call it a big, really bad fire, right? Like no, they're using otherworldly language to try and convey this idea of there is some other worldly thing that's really bad that we don't understand, and it's worse than what you go through in the here and now. And so if you just try to apply the here and now standards of how language is used to the afterlife, you you make it you, you make all of those descriptions pointless. Um, and so for me, that's that's always been where the view falls apart, and it doesn't cohere. It doesn't connect. Um, I do think that um, it has um, I do think that it has, so this is a more subjective weakness because it's my own, personal. Um, uh, I have this phrase that I always use, which is that like people live out their theology. Um, and I do think that, and again, I'm not trying to do the thing that I spoke against earlier, which is that like, I'm criticizing this tangential idea or whatever to say that that's why this view is bad. But I do think that adopting this view, because you're kind of also adopting this view of hell's not that bad, it can lead. I think that it can lead to a, a tendency for being lax about evangelism, but then also a tendency to be um, to adopt uh, other um, ideas that I don't think cohere with good doctrine, um, and not even necessarily ones like um, uh, that people might be thinking like the physical one, physicalism one that I mentioned earlier. Um, uh, there seems to be some overlap with the dynamic omniscience folks. Uh, I feel like almost every dynamic omniscience folk or person proponent that I see seems to also flirt with conditionalism, but not every single conditionalist agrees with Do. So that may be more of a one-way street or something. I'm not really sure. Um, but I do think it also leads into this idea of like, well, if so, with Reformed doctrine, there pretty famously a little while ago there was the whole Baal gate that is more talking about like what happens to infants when they die, and there's the debate of do babies go to hell, and I think that if you have this view that hell isn't really that bad, I think you're more likely to be willing to affirm this other bad idea because your view of hell isn't that bad. And yes, we don't just affirm views by our feelings, but um, I do think that we should listen to our intention or our intuitions a little bit whenever it comes to these things. So
Okay. And now finally we'll just cover how this view compares with your view. I think we kind of already touched on that a little
yeah,
bit, but what I said, but go ahead and take us through similarities or differences. What do you
yeah.
think?
So the similarity obviously is in the fact that Um, both views have this idea of gradual diminishing of some sort, right? Um, in the conditionalist view, it's the gradual diminishing of the whole being of the person, eventually down to nothing. In my view, it's the gradual diminishing of the person's consciousness, um, but never, and approaching nothingness, but never reaching nothingness. Um, and and so both of them have that in common. Both of them have in common that because they use that function, there is a finite amount of punishment for their sin. So they both get a gold star on that point. Difference, obviously, is that conditionalism is not eternal. Uh, is not eternal in time. Um, eternal in time is not a experientially eternal in time, right? Um, it's eternal in time and effect, right? Um, if that's how you're going to define things. Um, whereas my view is, you know, there is, it is experientially eternal for the subject, uh, and so that's the main difference.
Yeah. So you could say that when you graph out this view, this is a linear kind of
Yeah.
regression line.
Um.
It goes straight down, or consistently down. Maybe it's suddenly, maybe it's a step sort of deal of like an off switch sort of thing.
I had. Oh man, I had a chart. Yeah. You guys can't see this. Uh. Or maybe hold on. I'll do this. I'll do this. Oh no, this part of the video is gonna look awful. Um. Share my screen. Window.
It's fine. We're 30 minutes in. We're not impressing anyone now.
Can you see? Can you see my window over here?
Yes, there we go. Yeah, I
So
see it.
the charts look terrible because the axes are like super whited out.
Yeah.
But so like the ETC chart is just boom, straight line. You're just same level of consciousness the whole time. Conditionalist chart, you start off at 100%, you go down to zero after some. It's just straight linear, and then mine is obviously you got that curve going on. So yes, so that's the difference.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, and so that's where, like I said, I think, um, especially for you, since you also believe the view that that you've come up with, um, that there's a real utility in this view, in the missional immortality view existing, because it's a way to it's the other end with which you combine those two charts to
yes.
get to the idea of the asymptotic
Yeah.
graph.
Yeah.
So,
And I think it's I mean to me, I know that like I like personally I would rail against, you know, conditionalism more than eternal conscious torment. But really, if there's any group of people that I want to like hear my ideas and listen to them, it's these guys because I actually feel like I can help them out.
yeah.
I can be like,
Mhm.
hey guys, you don't need to do this weird
Yeah.
rigmarole thing of trying to play these semantic games to make this goofy view of yours work. You can actually have what you're trying to get to with just a slightly more sophisticated view, and you really don't need to change up like your understanding of all of these words.
Mhm.
You can basically keep it, just change up your understanding of what it means to be conscious, which we should be totally allowed to do. Like that's not written in stone in the Bible anywhere. Just change that up, and like you have a view that does exactly what you want it to do, right?
Yeah.
Um, and and so like that's sort of like my main goal is like just get this group of weirdos, which like I mean affectionately, right? Get them to like be like, hey, actually, there's a slightly better version of what you're going for here, and you can balance all of these things out because so like yes, he has all of these sections about like about like understanding the different meanings of all these words, but then the last really big section is um making an argument about the goodness of God, right? And that's a thing that they're trying to preserve, and I think that's a very good thing to try and preserve is to understand how a good and just God can implement this really terrible, horrifying idea, right? And we all agree that whatever it is, it has to be just. And we've just been struggling with like, okay, how do we come to understand that it is just? And I'm not even saying that my view is necessarily right, but I think my view is probably closer than what some of what some of these other guys have been putting forward.
So that being said, and you mentioned this before, that so few people have actually held this view, that that's part of the reason why there's so many different names for it. Um, who are some of the people um, that you can think of that are out there like actually championing this view?
So they're all YouTubers.
Mhm,
Yeah. So like the big one is Chris Date. Um, he was also a professor at Trinity. I don't know if he still is. Um, so he's probably the biggest one. They have, and I know that he's involved with. There's a big conference called Rethinking How that does that puts this on. Um, I'm trying to think of the other people that I'm thinking of. None of them have like none of them have like definitively like defended it. They're more
mhm,
like, oh, I'm interested in this idea. Actually, in kind of recent news, Kirk Cameron kind of came out and he was like, yeah, I think that this is like probably right. Um,
mhm.
and I might be wrong on that because I never actually watched his. He like released like a series of podcasts, and I never watched them.
Yeah.
But it was kind of news in like the apologetic circles for like a little while.
Mhm.
So he kind of came out and said like, yeah, I agree with conditionalism, and it's a pretty growing, it's a pretty growing sizable chunk. You know, I mean, a number of people at the church have like asked me about it,
Mhm.
and like and you know to jump back on like I don't think adopting this view like is a it's not a it's not a heresy if you adopt
Yeah.
this view, right? Like
Yeah.
the you know
Mhm.
I always say like I highly doubt that the thief on the cross like really had a good eschatology. Like I don't think he really knew how heaven and hell quite worked. Like
Yeah.
it's not a requirement, right? Um, and the you know the idea is we'll all find
Oh,
out
that's a thing.
who's right one day, right?
That's a
Um,
stance I take all the time, is that, um, perfect understanding or perfect theology is not required for salvation. It just never is.
um,
That
yeah, and
said, should you be striving for better knowledge and better doctrine? Absolutely.
and again, and I think the reason why you do that is because ultimately you're going to live out your theology, right? And
Yeah.
so your life is going to be impacted by what you believe. It's just
Mhm.
true, and it's your life
But
and the lives of the people around you and your community, right?
that being said, I think you're gonna you run into probably a lot of pitfalls if your way of rationalizing this view is to then go, well, there just isn't souls. Like, I think you're gonna have a big problem there.
Yeah,
Um,
I have I actually to that point I actually have bigger. like for what you just said, I think you have bigger problems in the dynamic
Yeah,
omniscience crowd.
you have much worse problems. Like if your stance is like, oh, like that'd be so funny to talk to someone in your, that has this view. You're just like, so why do you why do you believe in annihilationism? You're just like, oh yeah, people just don't have souls, and it's like, hold on, how did?
Yeah,
Yeah, this isn't the problem. Like
yeah.
we found it. We found the the problem. How are you dealing
Yeah,
with that?
I would
How
say
is that
I
going
would
for
say
you?
that if you went if that's how you got to like your conditionalism, it's like yeah, that's a pretty
Yeah.
like don't base it off of that. Like
Mhm.
I mean, yeah, I think you have a lot of issues. Um uh yeah,
Well, okay. I think we're at the end of the stuff that I can think of. So, Miles, you're here. If you have any
you're the
questions,
only one.
uh,
Uh, now I gotta think about this.
No, that's
oh,
fine.
Uh, uh,
you don't have to ask a question, by the
Yeah,
way.
you don't
It's just,
have yeah. It's not a
I don't know. I've been watching other things,
oh,
mhm.
not like just this, but just general like I don't know if you guys seen on Facebook like this guy named Taco Talks. He's a apologist or uh,
it
I
rings
don't
a
I don't.
bell, but I don't follow them.
But I just been watching some of his stuff, so how he like for Catholicism, how that's fake doctrine, which I agree with, because like the Mother Mary is not on the same level as what Jesus Christ is. You know, she's not sinless. You know, praying to her is essentially creating another god of what God asked us not to do in the first place, to pray to another gods other than me, kind of situation. And people are, the church commands people to pray to Mary, and then all those does like salvation is not 100% completed by Jesus Christ, and that you have to do other
Yeah.
sacraments, stuff like that.
Yeah. I have yeah, there's a lot of issues um with all of that. Um
Yeah, so I've been watching that, and then how the topic of hell with Catholicism, like purgatory and all those other things, and then versus like what you were talking about right now. I just thought hell was always just like a eternal thing. I didn't know it was, or how you were describing it with the nihilists was. It's just you're hurting for a bit, and then you vanish. I don't know how that makes sense. Essentially,
yeah, it like I I can't it's one of those things where it's like I can steel man it for a little bit for like as much as I can, but I can't give like a full throated endorsement because to me I think the arguments break down too quickly.
yeah,
But there are resources out there that like you can find to see people arguing for it. Um,
yeah. But I was just,
and
I never,
we might end up talking about purgatory a little bit because so like the fourth view discussed in the book, like I said, it's C.S. Lewis's view, but it's kind of combined with uh, it, it, uh, there's actually multiple like iterations of this Four Hells book, and they usually try to have the fourth one talking about purgatory. Um, but the guy kind of switches it up and mostly ends up talking about C.S. Lewis's view of hell, and it's sort of because C.S.'s view of purgatory is a view of hell is kind of like so purgatory becomes a kind of a complicated thing. The vast majority of people misunderstand what the actual Catholic doctrine of purgatory is, um, and I, as a non-Catholic, blame the Catholic Church for that because most Catholics do not understand the doctrine of purgatory, and it's like those are your own people, guys. Like, train them better. Um,
Hey, I actually am in favor of the Catholic Church doing poorly on their doctrine. I think
on
that
their
saves
on
a
their
lot of
catechisms. um, but basically, like the the proper Catholic doctrine of purgatory is that it's not like it's not a place of like decision making, or it's not a last chance to like either go to heaven or to go to hell. The proper doctrine is that everyone in purgatory is going to heaven. Purgatory is just like a temporary cleansing place. Um, and there are
Yeah, that's
and there are some Catholics, which I'll never be a Catholic, but if I was, this would be my view of purgatory. That apparently there are some Catholics that have this idea that like all believers go through purgatory, but purgatory might happen in an instant, and it's literally just you being cleaned up so that you can go to heaven. And it's like, okay, well, if you're gonna have that view, you're basically just arguing that there's no sin in heaven. It's like, sure, I'm fine with that. I always affirmed that. Like that was always an option.
It's effectively the same thing as saying, "Yeah, you go to hell," but then it's done. Like, if
Yeah,
it's done,
exactly.
did the step happen? Like,
Like
um,
you can kind of just skip that step, right? Like in exactly to your point. It's like, okay, you're kind of you're kind like and this is why like I do think annihilationism annihilationists open themselves up to this view of like, well, you kind of just to what your point is, you kind of just believe that there isn't a hell. Like like there isn't eternally, and the way that like there isn't eternally a hell, right? Like eventually everybody's gone out of it, right? Um, and so then you get again, like we talked about earlier, you get we like the smoke is rising from their punishment like forever. Why is the smoke always there if they're all gone, right?
the
But we're rehashing things now.
interesting side effect of that too, on top of the idea of you don't, um it's because you're not considering hell in as harsh terms, the idea is more welcoming, as you said before, um, and it lessens the impact of it, but it also has the effect of even in stuff like Dante's Inferno, that sort of thing, where going through hell, it's not good, but it's a form of connection to the past that, in a form of annihilationism, like it's you're saying like, oh, you can just forget about it. It's all gone in the end anyway. That at least the practice of recognizing that, oh, all these people are still there, um, and there's a reason why they're there, has as an effect too. So
And I think it's linked to this idea of right, like there's a reason why communist dictatorships are as brutal as they are, right? And again, this is linked to my whole thing of like you live out your theology. If you don't think that there's an afterlife, then what you end up doing is you try to create heaven on earth. And the way that you create heaven on earth is you kill all of the people that disagree with you, right? Like that's what happens. Um and so part of the thing that can dampen people's need for revenge is going, Jesus is going to get that guy. One day there's going to be a final judgment and Jesus is going to judge him. And so I don't need to go and get revenge. I think that he is going to be eternally punished for what he's done. But if I actually now think, oh, no, actually, he's not going to be eternally punished for what if my enemy is not going to be eternally punished for what they did to me, it's up to me to punish them. And so now I'm having to go out and get revenge. Right? This is an example of like your theology will actually make the world a more like in your attempt to do a more palatable form of theology, you're actually making the world a more violent place. And that's the problem with not being able to have a proper understanding of like how reality works and plays. And
We kind of do this as well with our actual judicial system, by the way, because like when you make these like cushy prisons, um,
you get more of it. Yes, exactly.
they well, you also get people that want to do their own vigilante justice
Which is where
because
which is
and,
where
and this
we're
is also
going
the
to,
problem of
right?
why when you get rid of capital punishment, like this is this same kind of thing. People, and then the thing is like when those vigilantes do happen, a lot of people tend to look the other way on it because
Yeah,
it's like, yeah, I mean, it was like, what were they supposed to do? Like, you
yeah.
didn't give them an option, and I think, yeah, that's because something in the system inherently was not delivering there. So similar concept. Well, okay. I think we've covered everything sufficiently. These aren't all going to manage to be fully an hour long. I don't think. So I think we stretched the time well
We'll
in this one.
really see about that on next week's because
Or whenever we get to
oh
this,
well
I
not
guess.
next week's in 2 weeks, yeah, because
Yeah.
I won't be here next
Yeah.
week. But yeah, but all right, thank you.
Yep. See you guys.
Yep. CMI.